Silence. A silence they forced on me. It happened in the middle of the Thanksgiving toast when I heard that flat, cold voice aimed right at me. Stay quiet. The words cut deep. It wasn't a request. It was an order, a cruel reminder that my voice didn't matter. I had been the backbone of that table for years, and now I was treated like an unwanted decoration, something better ignored. I saw the glances, some smirking, others pretending they hadn't heard. But all of them waiting for me to bow my head. I didn't. While the wine went down their throats, something inside me rose like fire, the certainty that this toast would not end in silence. My name is Brian Carter, and what my family never expected was that when I raised my glass, it wouldn't be to repeat nice words, but to make an announcement that turned that night upside down, because sometimes a single truth is enough to shatter a whole arrogance. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments, have you ever been silenced in public as if your voice didn't matter? But before I reveal what happened after I raised my glass that night, I need to tell you who I was before that moment, and why they thought they could shut me down. My story doesn't start with that Thanksgiving dinner. It starts 42 years earlier in a small apartment in Columbus, Ohio, where I met Margaret Collins at a church social. She was 25, working as a secretary at the local bank, and I was a 27-year-old carpenter with calloused hands and big dreams. "You've got kind eyes," she told me that first night as we shared coffee and apple pie in the church basement. "But there's something determined about you, too, like you're going to build something important." She was right. Over the next 4 decades, I built Carter Construction from a single pickup truck and a borrowed tool set into a respected family business worth $2.5 million. Not Fortune 500 money, but honest money. The kind of wealth that comes from getting up at 5 a.m. for 40 years, from treating customers fairly, from never cutting corners even when times got tough. Margaret and I raised 3 children in the 2-story. Colonial I built with my own hands on Maple Street. Michael, born in 1978, grew up to be everything I thought a father could want. Smart, ambitious, with an MBA from Ohio State. Lisa came 2 years later, beautiful and driven like her mother, becoming a real estate agent in the upscale suburbs. Tom, our youngest, born in 1985, inherited my mechanical aptitude, but somehow never found his direction. By 2023, I should have been enjoying the golden years. The business was solid, the house was paid off, and Margaret and I had accumulated enough to live comfortably without touching the principal. We'd done everything right, saved everything we could, and built a legacy we thought would benefit our family for generations. That's when the experiment began. It started innocuously enough. Michael called one evening in early October, his voice carrying that careful tone he used when he wanted something. "Dad, I've been thinking about something. You know how you always talk about the old days when you were just starting out? About how those were the best times, when life was simple. I was in my workshop, sanding down a jewelry box I was making for Margaret's birthday." "Sure, son, there's something to be said for simplicity." "Well, what if you could experience that again? What if you could step back from all the business stress, all the financial management, and just live simply for a while?" I set down the sandpaper. Something in his voice didn't sit right. "What are you getting at, Michael?" "Lisa and I have been researching this thing called simplicity therapy. It's where successful people voluntarily give up their complex lifestyles for 30 days to reconnect with their core values. Like a reset button for your priorities. The idea came wrapped in concern for my well-being, seasoned with psychological buzzwords that made it sound legitimate. Michael explained how the stress of managing assets and running a business was aging me prematurely, how I seemed disconnected from the simple pleasures that had once made me happy. Think about it, Dad. 30 days living like you did when you were just starting out. No business decisions, no financial worry, no complex responsibility. Just you reconnecting with who you really are underneath all the success. Margaret was surprisingly supportive when Michael presented the idea to both of us the following weekend. She sat in our living room, nodding along as our son painted a picture of me rediscovering joy in simple things. "He's been so stressed lately," she told Michael, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "Always worried about market fluctuations, tax implications, estate planning, maybe some time away from all that would be good for him." Lisa chimed in with research she'd found about successful business owners who'd benefited from voluntary simplicity experiences. Tom, uncharacteristically enthusiastic, offered to help set up a simple living environment where I could stay during the experiment. "Just 1 month, Dad," Michael pressed. "If you hate it, you come home immediately. But if it helps you find that peace and clarity you've been missing, imagine how much better your golden years could be." The hook was baited with love, concern, and the promise of rediscovering happiness. How could a father refuse his children's genuine desire to help him find peace? Looking back, I should have noticed the small inconsistencies. The way Michael's eyes didn't quite meet mine when he talked about my stress levels. How Lisa kept steering the conversation away from specifics about this therapy program. The fact that Tom, who usually couldn't organize his own sock drawer, had suddenly developed detailed plans for my living arrangements. But I was a father who loved his children and trusted their intentions. When they presented me with a folder full of research about simplicity therapy, complete with testimonials from other businessmen who'd found renewed purpose through the process, I saw only their care and concern. The rental house they found for my experiment was a modest 2-bedroom place on the south side of town. Nothing fancy, but clean and functional, the kind of place a working man might call home. They'd furnished it simply: a single bed, basic kitchen equipment, 1 television, no internet. The whole point is to disconnect from the complications of modern life, Lisa explained as she showed me around. No smartphones, no computers, no business calls, just you, your thoughts, and the simple pleasure of being present in each moment. Margaret helped me pack a single suitcase of casual clothes: work boots, jeans, flannel shirts, the uniform of my younger self. She kissed me goodbye at the front door of our real home, tears in her eyes. "I'll miss you, Brian, but I think this might be exactly what you need." I believed her. God help me, I believed all of them. What I didn't know was that the rental house was wired with hidden cameras in every room, that the simple living experience was actually an elaborate documentation project designed to record evidence of confusion, disorientation, or mental decline that could be used to declare me incompetent. What I didn't know was that my loving family was $870,000 in debt and desperately needed control of my assets to save themselves from financial ruin. What I didn't know was that my 30 days of simplicity therapy was actually 30 days of evidence gathering for a legal case that would rob me of everything I'd worked 40 years to build. But I was about to find out. The first week of my experiment felt genuinely refreshing. I woke up with the sunrise, made simple breakfasts of eggs and toast, and spent my days reading books I hadn't touched in years. There was something peaceful about having no phones to answer, no contracts to review, no employees depending on my decisions. I started taking long walks through the neighborhood, something I hadn't done since Margaret and I were newlyweds. The October air was crisp, the leaves were turning brilliant shades of gold and red, and for the first time in months my shoulders weren't tight with business tension. Michael called the landline every few days to check on me. "How are you feeling? Dad, are you finding that inner peace we talked about?" "You know what, son? I think you were right about this. I feel more relaxed than I have in years." "That's wonderful to hear. Are you keeping a journal like we suggested? Writing down your thoughts and feelings?" I was. Every evening I'd sit at the small kitchen table and write about my day in a composition notebook they'd provided. Simple observations about the weather, reflections on books I was reading, memories that surfaced when I had time to think. What I didn't realize was that every word I wrote was being photographed by cameras hidden in the kitchen light fixture. Lisa stopped by on day 8, bringing homemade cookies and maternal concern. She found me in the backyard, attempting to fix a broken gate latch with a screwdriver I'd found in the garage. "Dad, what are you doing? You could hurt yourself with that tool." I looked up confused. I'd been fixing things with my hands for 45 years. "It's just a loose screw, sweetheart. The gate won't latch properly." "But Dad, this isn't your house. You don't need to fix things that aren't your responsibility." That's the whole point of this experience. Letting go of the need to control and manage everything around you. She gently took the screwdriver from my hands, her voice full of patient understanding. "See? This is exactly the kind of compulsive behavior we were hoping you'd recognize and release." I let her take the tool, but something nagged at me. Since when was basic home maintenance considered compulsive behavior? Since when did my own daughter speak to me like I was a child who couldn't be trusted with simple tasks? On day 12, Tom arrived unannounced while I was attempting to balance my checkbook at the kitchen table. I'd been trying to keep track of small expenses, groceries, a few books from the used bookstore, coffee from the corner cafe where I'd started having breakfast twice a week. "Dad, what's all this?" He gestured at the scattered receipts and, "Calculator, just keeping track of my spending, son. Old habits, you know." Tom sat down across from me, his expression serious. "Dad, this is exactly what we were worried about. The compulsive need to manage and control financial details even when they don't matter." "They don't matter. Tom, it's important to know where your money goes." "But Dad, you're supposed to be learning to let go of financial anxiety. This obsessive tracking of every dollar is the kind of behavior that's been stressing you out for years." He gathered up the receipts and calculator, his movements gentle but firm. "Part of simplicity therapy is trusting that things will work out without constant monitoring and control." That night, I lay in the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. My children were treating normal, responsible behavior like symptoms of some kind of disorder. When had being careful with money become obsessive? When had fixing broken things become compulsive? The answer came on day 16 when I discovered the camera. I was reaching into the top shelf of the kitchen cabinet, looking for a larger coffee mug, when my fingers brushed against something that didn't belong. A small electronic device, no bigger than a matchbox, tucked behind the dinner plates. My heart stopped. With hands that had steadied under pressure for 4 decades, I carefully removed the device. It was a wireless camera, professional grade, with a tiny LED light that indicated active recording, the kind of equipment private investigators used for surveillance operations. I set it gently on the counter and began a methodical search of the house. Within an hour, I'd found 5 more cameras. One in the living room, hidden inside what I'd assumed was a decorative clock. One in the bedroom, concealed within a smoke detector that was newer than the others. One in the bathroom, tucked behind a ventilation grate. 2 more in the kitchen, positioned to capture different angles of the room where I spent most of my time. Every moment of my simplicity experiment had been recorded. Every conversation with my children, every word I'd written in that journal, every mundane detail of my daily routine, all of it documented by hidden cameras I'd never consented to. But why? I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by the surveillance equipment I'd discovered, and tried to make sense of what I was seeing. My children had convinced me to live in a house they'd wired for recording. They'd been documenting my behavior, while encouraging me to act in ways they later criticized as problematic. The pattern became clear. They asked me to keep a journal, then could point to my writing as evidence of obsessive behavior. They encouraged me to let go of financial tracking, then could claim I was becoming irresponsible with money. They told me to avoid controlling maintenance tasks, then could argue I was losing practical life skills. Every suggestion they'd made during my experiment was designed to create evidence of mental decline or incompetence. My hands were shaking as I reached for the landline to call Margaret. I needed to talk to my wife, needed to hear her voice, needed someone to help me understand what was happening to our family. The phone rang 4 times before she answered. "Margaret, it's me. I need to come home. Something's wrong with this experiment." "Brian, you sound upset. What's happened?" "I found cameras, Margaret. Hidden cameras throughout this house. Our children have been recording me without my knowledge or consent. The silence on the other end stretched too long." "Margaret, did you hear me?" "Yes, I heard you." Her voice was different now, careful. "Brian, are you sure about what you think you found? Maybe you're misinterpreting something." "I'm holding 5 surveillance cameras in my hands right now. This isn't a misinterpretation." Another pause. "Brian, honey, maybe this is exactly what we were worried about. The paranoid thinking, the suspicion of people who love you. Maybe you should talk to Dr. Morrison about what you're experiencing." Dr. Morrison was the family doctor who'd been treating us for 15 years. Why would Margaret suggest I needed psychological evaluation for discovering actual surveillance equipment, unless she already knew about the cameras? "Margaret, I'm coming home. We need to talk about this in person." "Brian, please don't do anything hasty. Let me call Michael and Lisa. Maybe they can explain whatever you think you've found." She hung up before I could respond. I sat in the kitchen of that wired house, surrounded by evidence of my family's deception, and felt something cold settle in my chest. My wife of 42 years had just dismissed my legitimate concerns as paranoid thinking. She'd suggested I needed psychiatric evaluation for discovering surveillance equipment that was actually there. Margaret knew about the cameras. My phone rang 20 minutes later. Michael's voice, urgent and concerned. "Dad," Mum called me. "She's worried about you. She said you're having some kind of paranoid episode." "I found the cameras, Michael." "What cameras, Dad?" "The surveillance equipment hidden throughout this house. 5 cameras, all recording, all positioned to document my daily activities." "Dad, there are no cameras in that house. I think you might be imagining things." I looked down at the devices, scattered across the kitchen table. "I'm holding them in my hands, son." "Dad, what you're holding might look like cameras to you, but I think you're misinterpreting normal household items. Smoke detectors, security equipment that was already in the rental house." "Michael, I've been in construction for 40 years. I know the difference between a smoke detector and a surveillance camera." "Dad, this is exactly what we were worried about when we suggested the simplicity experiment. The stress and paranoia, the suspicion of people who care about you. Maybe it's time to come home and get some professional help." Professional help. The same phrase Margaret had used. "I'm coming home, Michael. Tonight. Dad, please don't drive when you're in this state of mind. Let me come get you. We'll talk about everything calmly." I hung up the phone and looked around the house that had been my prison for 16 days. My children had convinced me to submit to surveillance. They documented every aspect of my behavior while encouraging actions they could later use as evidence of incompetence. When I discovered their deception, they immediately labeled me as paranoid and suggested I needed psychiatric intervention. This wasn't about helping me find inner peace. This was about building a legal case to declare me mentally unfit to manage my own affairs. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My own children were trying to steal my life's work by destroying my reputation and credibility. They'd enlisted my wife in the conspiracy, turned her against me, made her question my sanity when I discovered their surveillance operation. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated the man who'd built a successful business from nothing, who'd navigated 40 years of contracts and negotiations, who'd learned to read people's true intentions beneath their surface words. I gathered up the surveillance cameras and put them in a paper bag. Evidence I might need later. Then I packed my single suitcase, turned off the lights, and drove home to confront my family. But I wouldn't confront them as the confused, paranoid old man they expected to see. I'd confront them as the strategic businessman who just discovered he was fighting for everything he'd worked his entire life to build. The war was about to begin. The house on Maple Street looked different when I pulled into the driveway at 9:47 p.m. The windows glowed with warm light, and I could see shadows moving behind the curtains. My family gathered together while I'd been isolated in my surveillance cell across town. I sat in my truck for a moment, looking at the home I'd built with my own hands in 1982. Every board, every nail, every carefully measured angle had been a labor of love for the woman I married and the children we'd raised together. Now it felt like enemy territory. Margaret met me at the front door before I could use my key. Her face showed concern, but something else lurked behind her eyes, something I'd never seen before in 42 years of marriage. "Brian, thank God you're home. We've been so worried about you." Michael and Lisa were waiting in the living room, both of them wearing expressions of compassionate concern that felt rehearsed. Tom sat on the couch, fidgeting with his phone, unable to meet my eyes. "Dad, we need to talk about what happened today," Lisa said, her voice gentle but firm. "The phone calls, the confusion about ordinary household items, the paranoid thinking. We're concerned about your mental state." I set the paper bag containing the cameras on the coffee table I'd built 23 years ago. "You mean these ordinary household items?" I pulled out the first camera, then the second, then all 5 of them, arranging them in a neat row between the family photos and Margaret's collection of ceramic angels. The silence in the room was deafening. I found these hidden throughout the rental house you put me in. Professional surveillance equipment, recording my every movement for 16 days. Would someone like to explain why my simplicity experiment required constant video documentation? Michael cleared his throat, his MBA training kicking in. "Dad, those devices might have been pre-existing security equipment in the rental property. You can't assume they were placed there specifically to watch you. The rental property you selected. That you furnished? That you paid for?" I picked up one of the cameras, turning it over in my hands. "This model is only 6 months old, Michael. Brand new surveillance technology doesn't come standard in budget rental houses." Lisa tried a different approach. "Dad, even if there were cameras in the house, maybe the property management company installed them for security purposes. You can't jump to the conclusion that your own family would spy on you." "Can't I?" I looked around the room at the faces of the people I'd loved and provided for my entire adult life. Then explain why, when I called to report finding these cameras, I was immediately told I was being paranoid and needed psychiatric evaluation. Margaret stepped forward, her voice carrying the patient tone she'd once used with the children when they were small. "Brian, honey, you have to understand how your behavior looks from our perspective. The suspicion, the accusations, the inability to trust the people who love you most." "My behavior?" "Margaret, our children convinced me to live in a house wired for surveillance while pretending it was therapy for my own good. When I discovered their deception, you suggested I was having a mental breakdown. How exactly should my behavior look?" Tom finally spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dad, we were just trying to help. You've been so stressed lately, so overwhelmed with business decisions. We thought if we could document your daily routine, we might be able to identify patterns that were contributing to your anxiety." "Document my daily routine." The euphemisms were remarkable. "Tom, what you're describing is surveillance without consent. In most states, that's a felony." "Dad." Michael's voice carried a warning. Now you're getting agitated again. This kind of extreme thinking, these accusations against family members, this paranoid interpretation of innocent actions, this is exactly what we're worried about. The pattern was becoming clear. Every legitimate concern I raised was reframed. As evidence of mental decline, every reasonable question was twisted into proof of paranoid thinking. They'd created a closed loop where any resistance to their narrative became additional evidence supporting their narrative. It was brilliant, actually. Diabolical, but brilliant. You want to know what I think? I sat down in my leather recliner, the chair I'd saved 6 months to buy when we were young and money was tight. I think you're in financial trouble. Serious trouble, the kind that makes people desperate enough to betray their own father. The room went very still. I think you need control of my assets, and the fastest way to get that control is to have me declared mentally incompetent. Hence the surveillance, the documentation of supposedly confused behavior, the immediate questioning of my sanity when I discovered your operation. Lisa's face flushed red. That's ridiculous, Dad. We're not in any kind of financial trouble, aren't you? I looked directly at her. When's the last time you made a mortgage payment on that house in Westerville without my help? Her mouth opened, then closed. Michael, how much do you owe on credit cards right now? Rough estimate. His jaw tightened. My financial situation isn't relevant to this conversation. Tom, still making money on those cryptocurrency investments you were so excited about last year. Tom looked like he wanted to disappear into the couch cushions. I stood up and walked to the mantel where our wedding photo sat next to pictures of the children at various ages. Innocent faces, bright smiles, the kind of kids who'd run to greet their father when he came home from work. Here's what I think happened. You're all drowning in debt. Collectively, you owe more money than you can possibly repay with your current incomes. My death would solve your problems through inheritance, but I'm 71 and healthy. You couldn't wait for nature to take its course. I turned back to face them. So you developed a plan to have me declared incompetent, giving you legal control over my assets while I'm still alive. The simplicity experiment was phase 1, document confused or erratic behavior. Phase 2 would have been getting me evaluated by a compliant psychiatrist who'd rubber stamp your incompetence claim. Phase 3, legal guardianship and control of everything I've worked for. Margaret's voice was sharp now, the concerned wife. Act dropping away. Brian, you're making serious accusations based on your own paranoid fantasies. Am I? Margaret, when I called you from that surveillance house, your immediate response was to suggest I needed psychiatric evaluation. Not concern about the violation of my privacy, not anger that someone had been recording me without consent, not questions about who was responsible. Your first instinct was to discredit my credibility. She looked away. That tells me you already knew about the cameras. You were part of the plan from the beginning. The silence stretched until Michael finally broke it. Dad, even if we accept your interpretation of events, what exactly do you think you're going to do about it? I'm going to give you exactly what you want. They looked confused. You want evidence of incompetent behavior? You'll get it. You want documentation of confused thinking and poor judgment? I'll provide plenty. You want an old man who's lost touch with reality and can't manage his own affairs? I smiled for the first time since walking into that house. Congratulations. You're about to meet him. What do you think? Have you ever had family members betray your trust for money? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, but you haven't seen anything yet. What my children didn't realize was that their father had been negotiating with people trying to cheat him for 40 years. And I'd learned a few things about deception along the way. The real game was just beginning. The next morning, I began my performance as a confused old man, losing his grip on reality. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was fighting against. While Margaret slept, I spent 3 hours in my home office, systematically investigating my children's financial situations, using resources they'd forgotten I had access to. 40 years of business networking had given me connections in banks, credit agencies, and legal offices throughout central Ohio. The results were worse than I'd imagined. Michael's situation was a masterpiece of financial self-destruction. My eldest son, who'd graduated with honors from Ohio State's business program, had managed to accumulate $275,000 in debt through a combination of credit card advances, personal loans, and what appeared to be margin calls on stock investments. Gone wrong. The details painted a picture of a man living far beyond his means while desperately trying to maintain the appearance of success. A BMW lease he couldn't afford, a condo mortgage in the trendy Short North district that ate up 60% of his income, and a lifestyle funded entirely by borrowed money. The most damaging discovery was a series of transactions showing he'd been taking cash advances on multiple credit cards to make minimum payments on other cards, the kind of financial juggling act that could only end in bankruptcy. Lisa's troubles were different but equally desperate. My daughter, who'd always been careful with money, had gotten caught in the real estate market downturn while simultaneously facing a family medical crisis. Her husband's struggle with kidney disease had generated $85,000 in medical bills, not covered by insurance. Meanwhile, the 4-bedroom colonial they'd purchased in Westerville at the height of the market was now worth $75,000 less than they owed, leaving them trapped in an underwater mortgage they couldn't refinance. Recent bank records showed Lisa had missed 3 consecutive mortgage payments and received a formal notice of foreclosure proceedings. Without immediate intervention, she'd lose her home within 60 days. Tom's financial disaster was perhaps the most predictable. My youngest son had always been drawn to get-rich-quick schemes, but his latest adventure in day trading had evolved into something far more dangerous. Bank records showed he'd lost $150,000 of borrowed money in a series of increasingly desperate and cryptocurrency trades. When legitimate lending sources dried up, he'd apparently turned to less conventional financing arrangements. 3 wire transfers to accounts registered under names I didn't recognize, each bearing the unmistakable signature of loan shark operations, high-interest, short-term loans that carried implications far beyond mere financial difficulty. If Tom couldn't repay the $120,000 he'd borrowed from what appeared to be organized crime connections, his problems would extend well beyond bankruptcy. The combined debt totaled $870,000. Nearly $1 million in collective financial ruin spread across 3 adults who'd been raised to understand the value of money and the importance of living within their means. My wife appeared in the office doorway at 6:30 a.m., wearing the blue robe I'd bought her for Christmas 3 years ago. "Brian, what are you doing up so early?" I minimized the browser windows and turned to face her with a confused expression. "Oh, Margaret, I was trying to remember, did I pay the electric bill this month?" Her eyes sharpened slightly. "Honey, you've been asking about the electric bill every few days. I told you yesterday the bills are all current." "Are they?" I shuffled through some papers on my desk, making a show of looking lost. "I can't seem to find the records. Maybe I should call the electric company to make sure we're not in arrears." "Brian, it's 6:30 in the morning. The electric company isn't open." I looked at the clock with apparent surprise. "Is it? I thought it was later than that." Margaret sat down in the chair across from my desk, studying my face. "How are you feeling today, after everything that happened?" Last night, I frowned as if struggling to remember. "We had dinner, didn't we? Or was that yesterday? I'm having trouble keeping track of days lately." The lie came easily, wrapped in the kind of confusion that would be easy to document and difficult to disprove. Margaret's expression shifted from Suspicion to something that might have been guilt. Brian, do you remember finding the cameras, the conversation we had with the children? I rubbed my temples, playing up the uncertainty. Cameras? What cameras? In the rental house. You brought home some electronic equipment and accused us of spying on you. I don't remember that. I looked genuinely puzzled. Why would there be cameras? I thought I was just staying in a simple house to clear my head. Margaret reached across the desk and took my hand. Honey, I'm worried about you. These memory gaps, the confusion about basic things like bills and dates. Maybe we should make an appointment with Dr. Morrison, if you think that's best. I squeezed her hand, allowing vulnerability to show in my voice. I have been feeling scattered lately, like my thoughts don't connect the way they used to. Over the following days, I began dropping small signs of confusion and memory loss throughout our daily interactions. Nothing dramatic or obviously fake, just the kind of subtle cognitive slippage that might indicate early-stage dementia. I'd ask Margaret the same question twice in the span of an hour. I'd forget appointments I'd supposedly made. I'd stand in rooms looking confused about why I'd entered them. I'd struggle to remember the names of neighbors I'd known for 20 years. Michael noticed the changes during our next phone conversation. Dad, you sound different lately. More uncertain. Do I? I let my voice carry a note of worry. Michael, can I ask you something? Have I been repeating myself when we talk? Your mother mentioned that I sometimes ask the same questions over and over. Well, you did ask me twice yesterday if I'd received your message about Thanksgiving dinner. I did. I sounded genuinely distressed. I don't remember calling you twice. That's concerning, isn't it? Dad, maybe you should talk to a doctor. These kinds of memory issues can be early warning signs of treatable conditions. You really think so? I've been trying to hide it from your mother, but I've been getting confused about simple things. Bills, appointments, conversations I thought I'd had, but apparently never did. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. My son was encouraging me to seek medical evaluation for symptoms I was deliberately manifesting, to give him exactly the evidence he'd been trying to collect. Lisa picked up on the changes during her next visit. I answered the door, wearing 2 different shoes, and appeared not to notice the mismatch. Dad, your shoes. I looked down with apparent surprise. Oh, how did that happen? I could have sworn I put on my brown loafers. You're wearing 1 brown loafer and 1 black dress shoe. I sat down heavily in the hallway chair, looking defeated. This is happening more often lately. I'll get dressed and later discover I've put things on wrong, or forgotten to finish getting dressed, or worn clothes that don't match. Lisa's concern appeared genuine. Dad, how long has this been going on? A few months, maybe. I didn't want to worry anyone, but it's getting harder to hide. My performance was carefully calibrated, not the dramatic symptoms of advanced dementia, which would be too easy to spot as fake, but the subtle, early signs that concerned family members might reasonably document as evidence of cognitive decline. The masterpiece came during a family dinner at Michael's condo. I arrived 20 minutes late, claiming I'd gotten lost on roads I'd driven thousands of times. Dad, you've been to my place dozens of times. How could you get lost? I don't know. I looked genuinely distressed. I was driving down 5th Street, like always, but nothing looked familiar. I had to pull over and call information to get your address again. During dinner, I told the same story about a construction project 3 separate times, each time acting as if I'd never mentioned it before. When Lisa gently pointed out the repetition, I seemed surprised and embarrassed. I told that story already. I'm sorry. My mind feels foggy lately. Tom watched from across the table with an expression I couldn't quite read. Guilt, maybe, or recognition that their plan was working better than they'd hoped. After dinner, I excused myself to use the bathroom and deliberately left the water running. When Michael discovered it 20 minutes later, I acted confused about how it had happened. I turned off the faucet. I'm sure I did. Dad, The water was running at full pressure. You couldn't have turned it off, but I remember turning it off. I looked at my hands as if they belonged to someone else. I've been having trouble with simple tasks lately. Yesterday, I couldn't figure out how to work the coffee maker we've had for 6 years. By the end of October, my family was quietly documenting a pattern of behavior that painted a clear picture of a man losing his cognitive abilities. What they didn't know was that I was also documenting their documentation. Margaret had started keeping a journal of my episodes. Michael had begun recording our phone conversations for medical reference. Lisa had started taking pictures when I appeared confused or disoriented. They thought they were building a case against me. Actually, they were building a case against themselves, and the beauty of it was, they were doing it with such love and concern, such genuine worry for my well-being, that they'd never be able to claim malicious intent. At least, not until they tried to use their evidence to steal everything I'd worked my entire life to build. But I wasn't ready for that confrontation. Yet, first, I needed to understand one more crucial piece of the puzzle, exactly what they were planning to do with the evidence they were so carefully collecting. The answer to that question would determine just how far I was willing to take this. Game, thank you for staying with me through this story. I promise you the best is yet to come. The breakthrough came on November 15th, when I discovered Margaret's secret phone. I was looking for my reading glasses in her purse, a completely innocent search that had been routine in our marriage for over 4 decades. Margaret had always been comfortable with me retrieving items from her bag when she was busy, just as I was comfortable with her doing the same with my wallet or jacket pockets. But tucked behind her usual collection of receipts, breath mints, and lipstick tubes, my fingers found a second cell phone I'd never seen before. It was a basic flip phone, the kind people used when they wanted to keep communications private. The kind of device someone might purchase with cash to avoid leaving digital footprints tied to their regular accounts. My hands shook slightly as I powered it on. The recent call log told a story that made my blood run cold. 17 calls to something listed as Attorney J. Morrison over the past 3 weeks. 12 calls to Dr. Patterson, psych eval. 6 calls to a number that showed up simply as Guardian Services, but it was the text messages that revealed the true scope of their conspiracy. Margaret to Attorney J. Morrison, November 3rd. Documented 3 more episodes this week. Brian couldn't remember paying bills, got lost driving to grocery store, asked same question 5 times in one conversation. Attorney J. Morrison to Margaret, November 3rd. Perfect. Keep detailed records. We'll need at least 30 documented incidents for emergency competency hearing. How are the children's statements coming? Margaret to Attorney J. Morrison, November 5th. Michael has recordings of confused phone calls. Lisa has photos of Brian wearing mismatched clothes, leaving appliances on. Tom is reluctant, but will testify if necessary. Attorney J. Morrison to Margaret, November 5th. Tom's testimony isn't crucial if we have enough documentation from you and Michael. Focus on daily living activities, confusion about basic tasks, memory gaps, financial mismanagement. The messages continued for pages, laying out a legal strategy that was breathtaking in its thoroughness and chilling in its betrayal. Dr. Patterson. Psych eval to Margaret, November 8th. Ready to conduct evaluation when you bring him in. Based on family reports, should be straightforward determination of diminished capacity. Margaret to Dr. Patterson, November 8th. How long before we can get official declaration? Family needs to act quickly for his own protection. Dr. Patterson. To Margaret, November 8th. Emergency competency order can be issued within 48 hours of evaluation if evidence supports cognitive impairment. Guardian Services already has preliminary paperwork prepared. Guardian Services. I scrolled through those messages with growing horror. Guardian Services to Margaret, November 12th. Asset inventory complete based on financial documents you provided. Recommend immediate conservatorship to prevent further financial damage from impaired decision-making. Margaret to Guardian Services, November 12th. What about his business? Can Guardian sell assets if necessary for his care? Guardian Services. To Margaret, November 12th. Guardian has full authority over all assets, including business liquidation if deemed in Ward's best interest. Proceeds held in trust for care expenses. My wife of 42 years was coordinating with a professional guardian service to have me declared incompetent, strip me of all legal rights, and liquidate my life's work under the guise of protecting me from my own diminished capacity. The business I'd built from nothing, the house I'd constructed with my own hands, the savings I'd accumulated through 40 years of careful management, all of it would disappear into a care trust controlled by strangers who'd never met me but were prepared to declare me mentally unfit based on second-hand reports from family members. But the most devastating discovery was a message exchange from just 2 days earlier. Margaret to Attorney J. Morrison, November 13th. Brian's getting suspicious again, asking questions about finances, wanting to see bank statements. Should we accelerate timeline? Attorney J. Morrison to Margaret, November 13th. Yes, any resistance to family authority can be documented as agitation and paranoia. Schedule Dr. Patterson evaluation for this week. Margaret to Attorney J. Morrison, November 13th. What if he refuses to go? Attorney J. Morrison to Margaret, November 13th. Emergency hold for psychiatric evaluation. If family reports concern for his safety due to confused behavior, authorities can transport him involuntarily. They were planning to have me committed for psychiatric evaluation against my will, using my own manufactured symptoms as evidence that I posed a danger to myself. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. Not just my children drowning in debt and desperate for my money, but my wife, the woman who'd shared my bed for 4 decades, who'd raised our children together, who'd been my partner through every triumph and setback of our adult lives. Margaret hadn't been manipulated by our children. She was the architect of their conspiracy. I sat in our bedroom, holding the evidence of my family's betrayal, and felt something cold and final settle in my chest. The man who'd trusted his family with his life, his fortune, and his future was dead. In his place sat someone harder, more calculating, someone who understood that this war would be fought without mercy or sentiment. But they'd made a critical error in their planning. They'd assumed that the confused, forgetful old man they'd been documenting was real. They'd mistaken the performance for the performer, the symptoms for the strategist creating them. What they were about to discover was that their target had been anticipating their moves, documenting their conspiracy, and preparing a response that would destroy their lives as thoroughly as they'd planned to destroy his. I put Margaret's secret phone back exactly where I'd found it, erasing any trace that I'd discovered their communications. Then I walked to my own office and began making phone calls to people who specialized in a very different kind of legal strategy. By the time my family sat down for Thanksgiving dinner, I'd be ready to give them a feast they'd never forget. But first, I needed to accelerate my own timeline. If Margaret was planning to have me involuntarily committed for psychiatric evaluation, I had less than a week to complete my preparations. The confused old man they'd been documenting was about to disappear forever, replaced by someone they'd never expected to encounter. A strategist who'd spent 40 years outmaneuvering people who underestimated him. The endgame was approaching, and they had no idea what was coming. The performance of my life began in earnest the Monday before Thanksgiving. If my family wanted evidence of dramatic cognitive decline, I'd give them something that would exceed their wildest expectations and create a legal record that would protect me from their conspiracy. First, I needed witnesses, People outside my family who could testify to my apparent mental deterioration, but also to the way my family responded to that deterioration. My target was the regular Monday morning coffee group at Della's Diner. 6 retired men who'd been meeting weekly for 15 years to discuss everything from politics to grandchildren. Harold Peterson, my former business partner, Jim Martinez, who'd run the local hardware store for 30 years, Bill Crawford, a retired bank manager, Dave Thompson, former high school principal, Mike O'Connor, retired from the phone company, and me. I arrived at Della's 20 minutes late, looking confused and slightly disheveled. "Brian," Harold called out as I stood in the doorway, apparently unsure where to sit. "Over here, buddy. Your usual spot." I approached the table hesitantly. "Harold, I'm sorry, I thought we were meeting wasn't it supposed to be at the place with the red booths?" "The red booths?" Jim looked puzzled. "Brian, we've been meeting here every Monday for 15 years. Same table, same time." I sat down slowly, looking genuinely disoriented. "Of course. I don't know what I was thinking. I've been having trouble with places lately." Bill, the former banker, leaned forward with concern. "What kind of trouble, Brian?" "Forgetting where things are. Getting lost, driving to places I've been 100 times. Yesterday I couldn't find my way home from the grocery store." I rubbed my temples. "Margaret had to come find me in the Kroger parking lot. I was sitting in my truck, completely lost." The men exchanged worried glances. These were people who'd known me for decades, who'd watched me build a successful business, who'd never seen me display any signs of confusion or uncertainty. Dave Thompson, the former principal, had dealt with aging teachers throughout his career. "Brian, have you talked to a doctor about this?" "Margaret wants me to. The children too. But I'm scared of what they might find." I let vulnerability creep into my voice. "What if it's, what if I'm losing my mind?" "Hey now," Mike O'Connor reached across the table to pat my shoulder. "Lots of things can cause memory problems. Medication interactions, stress, depression. Doesn't mean you're losing your mind." That's what I keep telling myself, but it's getting worse. I pulled out a small notebook with shaking hands. I have to write everything down now, or I forget it completely. Harold examined the notebook when I set it on the table. Page after page of my handwriting, documenting appointments, conversations, daily tasks. The meticulous record-keeping of a man desperately trying to maintain control over a failing memory. "Brian, this is good," Harold said gently. "You're adapting, finding ways to cope. That shows your mind is still working fine." "Does it?" "Because sometimes I write things down and then can't remember writing them." I flipped through pages of the notebook. "Look at this entry from last Tuesday. I wrote, 'Call Tom about Thanksgiving,' but I don't remember writing it, and I don't remember if I ever made the call." The conversation continued for an hour, with me displaying exactly the kind of confused, forgetful behavior that would concern friends, but not seem fake or exaggerated. Just a gradual, sad decline in someone they'd all respected and admired. When I left Della's, I knew Harold would call his wife within an hour to discuss their concerns about Brian Carter's apparent mental deterioration. And Harold's wife would mention it to her bridge group, and the bridge group would discuss it at the beauty parlor, and by evening, half the town would know that Brian Carter was having some problems. Perfect! My next performance was at Carter Construction, where I needed to create witnesses among my employees while also protecting the business from my family's plans to liquidate it. I called a staff meeting for Tuesday afternoon, gathering my 12 employees in the small conference room we'd built when the company expanded in 2018. "I need to talk to you all about some changes that might be coming," I began, my voice carrying a tremor that wasn't entirely acting. "My family is concerned about my ability to continue managing the business effectively." Silence around the table. These were men and women who'd worked for me for years, who'd seen me handle complex projects and difficult customers with steady competence. I've been having some difficulties lately. Memory problems, confusion about details I used to handle easily. I look down at my hands. My wife and children think it might be time for me to step back from day-to-day operations. Sarah Martinez, my office manager for 8 years, spoke first. "Mr. Carter, we haven't noticed any problems with your work. You seem as sharp as ever." "That's kind of you to say, Sarah, but I've been covering up problems that are getting harder to hide." I pulled out a folder of documents. "I've prepared something I need you all to witness." The documents were a carefully crafted business succession plan that I'd had prepared by an attorney my family didn't know existed. Instead of leaving Carter Construction vulnerable to liquidation by a court-appointed guardian, I was transferring operational control to a management trust operated by my employees. If I'm declared unable to manage the business, this trust will take over operations. You'll continue to receive your salaries, the company will continue to serve our customers, and profits will be held in reserve until I'm able to resume control or make permanent arrangements. What I didn't tell them was that the trust also contained provisions to prevent any family member from selling or liquidating company assets without unanimous consent from the employee board. My family could have me declared incompetent, but they couldn't destroy the livelihood of 12 people who'd helped me build Carter Construction into a respected local business. "Mr. Carter," asked Tom Wilson, my senior foreman, "is there anything we can do to help? Any way we can support you through whatever you're dealing with?" The genuine concern in his voice almost broke my heart. These people cared about me as a person, not just as a source of income. The contrast with my family's calculated betrayal was painful. "Just keep doing the excellent work you've always done. And if anyone asks questions about my mental state or my ability to run this company, please be honest about what you observe." They would be honest. They'd tell anyone who asked that Brian Carter had seemed worried and uncertain lately, that he'd expressed concerns about memory problems, but that his work performance remained solid and his business judgment appeared sound. More witnesses, more documentation, more evidence that I was aware of my difficulties and taking responsible steps to address them. Wednesday brought the most challenging performance yet. A staged argument with Margaret that would be witnessed by our neighbors and documented by her secret phone. I waited until Margaret was gardening in our front yard, well within earshot of Mrs. Patterson next door, who'd been hanging laundry with suspicious dedication to outdoor chores whenever Margaret and I were both outside. "Margaret, where did you put the insurance papers?" I called from the front porch, my voice carrying the irritation of someone who'd been searching unsuccessfully. "What insurance papers, Brian?" "The homeowner's policy. I need to check something about the coverage, but I can't find the folder anywhere." Margaret looked up from the flower bed she was weeding. "Honey, I haven't moved any insurance papers. They're in the filing cabinet where they've always been." I looked in the filing cabinet. They're not there. I walked down from the porch, agitation building in my voice. "Someone moved them and I need to find them today." "Brian, let me help you look. Maybe they got misfiled." "They didn't get misfiled." My voice rose enough that Mrs. Patterson paused in her laundry hanging to listen more carefully. "Someone deliberately moved them, and I want to know who and why." Margaret's expression shifted to patient concern, exactly as I'd expected. "Honey, nobody moved your insurance papers. You're getting upset over something that has a simple explanation." "Don't talk to me like I'm a child, Margaret. I've been managing important documents for 40 years. When papers disappear from where I put them, someone moved them." "Brian, please calm down. You're shouting over something that isn't worth getting angry about." "I'm not angry. I'm frustrated. Why won't anyone in this family believe me when I say something is wrong?" I stormed back into the house, slamming the front door hard enough that Mrs. Patterson jumped. Through the window, I watched Margaret pull out her regular cell phone, not the secret one, and make a call that I knew would be to either Michael or Lisa. "He's having another episode," I could imagine her saying. Getting paranoid about missing documents, accusing people of deliberately hiding things from him. Perfect. Another incident for their growing file of evidence documenting Brian Carter's mental deterioration and increasing agitation. What they didn't know was that the insurance papers were exactly where they'd always been, in the filing cabinet, in the folder marked property insurance. I'd checked before starting the argument, but Margaret's secret phone would record this as another example of confusion, paranoia, and inappropriate emotional responses. Exactly the kind of behavior pattern that would support an emergency competency hearing. Thursday morning, I made one final preparation for the Thanksgiving confrontation that would end this charade forever. I drove to my attorney's office, not the family lawyer who'd handled our wills and business documents for 20 years, but a specialist in elder law and competency disputes who'd been quietly preparing for this day since I'd first discovered the surveillance cameras. "Everything is in place, Mr. Carter," Robert Hayes assured me as I signed the final documents. "If your family attempts to have you declared incompetent based on the evidence they've been gathering, these documents will destroy their case and expose their conspiracy. And if they try to have me involuntarily committed, the psychiatric evaluation records we've prepared will prevent that. Dr. Williams has documented your complete mental competence as of yesterday. Any attempt at involuntary commitment based on family reports will be met with independent medical evidence contradicting their claims." I left the attorney's office with a briefcase containing enough legal ammunition to obliterate my family's conspiracy and protect everything I'd worked 40 years to build. Tomorrow was Thanksgiving Day. Tomorrow, my children would gather around the table I'd built in the house I'd constructed, planning to give thanks while secretly celebrating what they believed was the final phase of their plan to rob me of everything I owned. They had no idea they were walking into the most devastating trap I'd ever constructed. The confused, forgetful old man they'd been documenting was about to disappear forever, replaced by someone they'd underestimated catastrophically. A businessman who'd spent 4 decades outmaneuvering people who tried to cheat him. By the time dessert was served, they'd understand exactly how much trouble they were in. But first, I had to let them believe they'd won. If you're still not subscribed to this channel, now would be a perfect time to hit that button, because what happens next will change everything. Thanksgiving Day arrived grey and cold, with the kind of November sky that promised snow before nightfall. I woke early and spent an hour in my workshop, putting finishing touches on the jewelry. Box I'd been making for Margaret's Christmas present. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my wife was coordinating my legal destruction, I was still crafting gifts for her with the same careful attention to detail I'd shown throughout our marriage. But today, that man would cease to exist. The family began arriving at noon. Michael and his wife Jennifer came first, carrying a green bean casserole and the weight of their financial desperation. Lisa arrived with her husband Robert and their 2 teenagers, Emma and Jake, my grandchildren who had no idea their parents were planning to steal their grandfather's legacy. Tom was the last to arrive, looking nervous and avoiding eye contact as he helped his girlfriend Jessica arrange the pumpkin pie she'd made specially for the occasion. Margaret had outdone herself, preparing the meal. The dining room table groaned under the weight of turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, and all the traditional fixings that had marked our Thanksgiving celebrations for 25 years. Everything looked perfect. Everything felt normal. Everything was a lie. "Dad, you seem more relaxed today," Michael observed as we gathered in the living room before dinner. "Less confused than you've been lately." "I've been taking those supplements Dr. Morrison recommended," I replied, settling into my recliner. "They seem to help with the mental fog." It was a small test. I'd never seen Dr. Morrison about mental fog or any other cognitive issues, but Michael nodded as if the explanation made perfect sense, eager to believe that my improved clarity was temporary and medication-induced rather than evidence that my previous confusion had been manufactured. "That's wonderful, Dad," Lisa added. "We've all been so worried about you." "Have you? That's very kind." I looked around the room at my family, letting genuine sadness show. In my eyes, I know I've been difficult lately. The memory problems, the confusion, getting angry about things that probably weren't worth getting angry about. Tom shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Dad, we just want what's best for you. I know you do, son. And I want you to know that I'm grateful for your patience, all of you." I paused, looking directly at Margaret. "Especially you, sweetheart. I know it can't be easy living with someone who's losing his grip on things." Margaret's smile was perfect, loving, supportive, touched with appropriate sadness. "Brian, you're not losing your grip. You're just adjusting to some challenges." Challenges. That's a nice way to put it. I stood up slowly, moving like a man whose confidence had been shaken. "Should we move to the dining room? This wonderful meal won't stay warm forever." The early part of dinner proceeded normally. Conversation about the children's work, updates on the grandkids' school activities, gentle gossip about neighbors and old friends. I participated carefully, occasionally seeming to lose track of conversational threads, but generally appearing more mentally present than I had in weeks. I waited until Margaret began serving dessert to drop the first hint that this wouldn't be an ordinary family gathering, you know, I said, setting down my coffee cup with deliberate care. "I've been thinking a lot lately about legacy, about what we leave behind when we're gone." The room went subtly quiet. These were dangerous waters for a family harboring the secrets mine was carrying. I mean, I've spent 40 years building Carter Construction, accumulating assets, trying to provide security for all of you. I looked around the table. But lately, with all the confusion I've been experiencing, I've started wondering if I've been a good steward of what we've built together. Michael leaned forward slightly. "Dad, you've been an excellent steward. You've provided for all of us beyond anything we could have hoped for." "Have I? Because sometimes I feel like my judgment isn't what it used to be, like maybe I'm not seeing things clearly anymore." "Dad," Lisa's voice carried careful concern, "if you're worried about business decisions or financial management, maybe it would help to have some assistance, people you trust who could help you navigate complex choices. People I trust." The phrase hung in the air like smoke. That's an interesting point, Lisa. Trust is so important, isn't it? Especially in families. I took a sip of coffee, letting the moment stretch. I've been thinking a lot about trust lately, about who deserves it and who doesn't. Tom's fork clinked against his plate as he set it down too quickly. "What I've realized," I continued conversationally, "is that trust is like a bank account. You make deposits over time, acts of honesty, loyalty, love, but you can also make withdrawals, lies, betrayal, deception." Margaret's smile was beginning to look strained. "Brian, what are you getting at?" "What I'm getting at, Margaret, is that some people have been making withdrawals from my trust account without my knowledge." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out Margaret's secret phone, setting it gently on the table next to the cranberry sauce. The silence was deafening. You see, I've been having memory problems lately, but my eyesight is still excellent. Excellent enough to read text messages about attorney consultations, psychiatric evaluations, and guardian services. Michael's face went white. Lisa's mouth dropped open. Tom looked like he was going to be sick. "Did you really think I wouldn't find it, Margaret? A secret phone hidden in your purse, containing months of communications about having me declared mentally incompetent, Brian, I can explain. Can you explain why my wife of 42 years has been coordinating with strangers to have me involuntarily committed for psychiatric evaluation? I picked up the phone and began reading. Margaret to Dr. Patterson, November 8th. How long before we can get official declaration? Family needs to act quickly for his own protection. I looked around the table at faces frozen in horror. My own protection. That's touching, really. Michael tried to recover. Dad, if you read those messages out of context. Out of context? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Michael, your mother has been working with a guardian service to liquidate my business and seize control of all our assets. What context makes that acceptable? I stood up, pulling a manila folder from beneath my chair, documents I'd placed there before the family arrived. Since we're talking about context, let me provide some. I opened the folder and began pulling out bank statements. Michael, you owe $275,000 in credit card debt and personal loans. Your condo is in foreclosure. You haven't made a mortgage payment in 4 months. I placed his financial records on the table in front of him. Lisa, you're $325,000 in debt between medical bills and an underwater mortgage. You received a foreclosure. Notice 6 weeks ago. Her financial documents joined Michael's. Tom, you've lost $150,000 in day trading and borrowed another $120,000 from what appeared to be loan shark operations. Judging by the interest rates, you have perhaps 2 weeks before your creditors resort to non-financial methods of debt collection. Tom's records completed the devastating display. Combined, my children owe $870,000, nearly $1 million in debt that you can't possibly repay with your current incomes. I sat back down, looking at each of them in turn, but my death would solve all your problems through inheritance. Or if you couldn't wait for me to die naturally, having me declared incompetent would give you legal control over my assets while I was still alive. Dad, it's not like that, Lisa whispered, isn't it? Then explain the surveillance cameras you hid in my temporary housing. Explain the psychological evaluation you scheduled without my knowledge. Explain why my confused behavior always seemed to occur when you were conveniently present to document it. I pulled out another set of documents. The business succession trust I'd established, the psychiatric evaluation confirming my mental competence, the legal protections I'd put in place while they'd been gathering evidence against me. What you didn't realize is that I've been documenting your conspiracy as carefully as you've been documenting my supposed mental decline. Every phone call, every staged incident, every lie you've told has been recorded and preserved. Margaret found her voice. Brian, we were trying to help you. You were showing signs of confusion, memory loss. Was I? Or was I showing you exactly what you wanted to see? I smiled for the first time since sitting down. Margaret, every incident of confusion you documented was deliberately performed for your benefit. The memory gaps, the disorientation, the inappropriate emotional responses. All of it was theater. The realization dawned on their faces like sunrise over a battlefield. You see, I've spent 40 years negotiating with people who wanted to cheat me, contractors who padded bills, clients who tried to avoid payment, competitors who attempted to sabotage my business. I learned to recognize deception, to anticipate betrayal, to plan several moves ahead of people who underestimated me. I looked directly at Margaret. When I found your surveillance equipment, I knew exactly what you were planning. So I gave you what you wanted, evidence of a confused old man losing his grip on reality. Meanwhile, I was protecting everything you were trying to steal. Tom finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Dad, we never meant for it to go this far, didn't you? Tom, your mother scheduled an involuntary psychiatric commitment for next week. Your brother has been recording our phone conversations as evidence. Your sister has been photographing me during manufactured episodes of confusion. I spread the evidence across the table like playing cards. Exactly how far did you mean for it to go? The room fell silent, except for the grandfather clock in the hallway marking time in our ruined family gathering. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued, my voice calm and businesslike. "Tomorrow morning, I'm filing criminal charges against all of you for conspiracy to commit fraud against an elderly person. It's a federal crime punishable by up to 20 years in prison." Lisa started crying. Michael put his head in his hands. Tom just stared at the table. "Brian, please," Margaret whispered. "We're your family." "Are you? Because family doesn't try to have each other declared mentally incompetent to steal their life savings. Family doesn't hire guardian services to liquidate each other's assets. Family doesn't coordinate involuntary psychiatric commitments based on manufactured evidence." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the grey November sky. But then I realized something. Sending you all to prison wouldn't solve the real problem. It wouldn't address the desperation that drove you to betray me. It wouldn't help you learn the difference between entitlement and gratitude. I turned back to face them. "So I've decided to do something different, something that will hopefully teach you lessons that 20 years in federal prison never could." I reached for my wine glass and raised it in a toast. "Stay quiet," Michael said suddenly, his voice flat and cold. The words hit me like a physical blow. Not because they were cruel, but because they were exactly what I'd been waiting for. "I beg your pardon." "You heard me, Dad. Stay quiet. We've listened to enough of your sanctimonious speeches for one evening." The mask had finally dropped. The loving, concerned son was gone, replaced by a man desperate enough to destroy his own father. "For money." "We know you're not as confused as you've been pretending," Lisa added, her tears drying as anger took over. "But we also know you can't prove we did anything illegal. The surveillance was for your own protection. The psychological evaluation was recommended by medical professionals. The guardian services were contacted out of legitimate concern for your well-being. They thought they still had a chance to salvage their plan. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. I raised my glass higher, looking around the table at the faces of people who'd just revealed their true nature. "To family," I said. And then I made the announcement that changed everything. The wine glass felt heavy in my hand as I held it aloft, looking at the faces around the table. Faces that had shifted from shock to calculation to desperate defiance in the span of a single conversation. "Stay quiet," Michael had said. The words that would destroy any remaining pretense that this conspiracy was motivated by love or concern for my well-being. "To family," I repeated, letting the irony hang in the air like incense. "And to the lessons we learn about the people we trust most." I took a sip of wine, set the glass down gently, and pulled out my phone. "What you don't realize is that this entire conversation has been recorded." I held up the device, showing the voice recording app that had been running since before dinner began. Every admission, every threat, every moment of truth when your masks finally dropped. The color drained from Michael's face. "Dad, you can't record us without consent. That's illegal." "Actually, son, Ohio is a one-party consent state. I can record any conversation I'm participating in." I stopped the recording and saved the file. "But more importantly, you're in my house, at my table, eating my food while planning to steal my life's work. I think the legality of recording equipment is the least of your concerns right now." Margaret was staring at the phone like it was a loaded weapon. "Brian, please, turn that off and let's talk about this reasonably." "Reasonably?" "Margaret, you've been coordinating with strangers to have me declared mentally incompetent and strip me of all legal rights. What part of that was reasonable?" I walked back to my chair, but remained standing, looking down at the people who'd raised, loved, and provided for throughout my adult life. For the record, since we're being documented now, I want everyone to acknowledge what's really happening here. My children are drowning in nearly $1 million of combined debt. My Wife has been secretly working with attorneys and guardian services to have me committed for psychiatric evaluation and declared legally incompetent. The goal was to seize control of my assets under the guise of protecting me from my own confused mental state. That's not, Lisa started. Don't, I cut her off. Don't insult my intelligence with more lies. I have your mother's secret phone, containing months of coordination with attorneys, psychiatrists, and professional guardians. I have bank records showing your debts, loan shark transactions, foreclosure notices. I have recordings of staged incidents designed to document my supposed mental decline. I pulled out another chair and sat down, placing myself at eye level with them. What I don't understand is the timeline. Why now? Why Thanksgiving? What was supposed to happen today that made you think you could finally drop the pretense and order me to stay quiet? The silence stretched uncomfortably until Tom finally spoke. We were going to tell you that we'd made an appointment with Dr. Patterson for Monday. For your own good, because we were worried about your mental state. An involuntary psychiatric evaluation that would result in emergency competency proceedings. I nodded. And if I refused to go? Michael's jaw tightened. Emergency hold. Family. Petition claiming you were a danger to yourself due to confused behavior. So if I resisted being committed against my will, that resistance would become additional evidence of my unstable mental state. I had to admire the elegance of their trap. Brilliant, really. Any response I made would support your narrative that I needed to be managed for my own protection. Dad, we weren't trying to hurt you, Lisa said quietly. We were trying to help. You. Were you? Lisa. Guardian Services was prepared to liquidate Carter Construction and sell this house to pay for my care in whatever facility you'd selected. How exactly does destroying everything I've worked for help me? She looked away. Let me tell you what would have happened after your successful competency hearing. A professional guardian would have been appointed to manage all my assets. Carter Construction would have been sold, probably at a fraction of its value, to ensure quick liquidation. This house would have gone on the market. My investments would have been converted to cash and deposited in a care trust controlled by strangers. I stood up and walked to the mantel where our family photos were displayed. 40 years of Christmas mornings, birthdays, graduations, weddings. All the moments that should have bonded us together but had apparently meant nothing when set against $870,000 in debt. The beautiful part of your plan was that once the Guardian had control, you could petition for distributions to support the family of the incapacitated person. Your debts would have been paid with my money, justified as necessary support for my relatives who were sacrificing to care for me. I turned back to face them. Meanwhile, I'd have been warehoused in some care facility, declared legally incompetent, stripped of the right to make decisions about my own life, watching strangers liquidate everything I'd built while my family pretended they were protecting me. Margaret was crying now, but whether from guilt or the collapse of their plan, I couldn't tell. Brian, it wasn't supposed to be like that. We needed help. You needed help? Margaret, you needed $870,000 to bail out 3 adult children who'd made disastrous financial decisions. Instead of asking for help, you decided to steal it by destroying my life. I walked back to the table and gathered up all the evidence I'd spread across its surface. The financial records, the secret phone, the legal documents, the bank statements that told the story of a family's greed and betrayal. Here's what's going to happen now. Tomorrow morning, I'm meeting with the FBI's Elder Abuse Task Force to file criminal charges against all of you. Conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted theft of assets, conspiracy to violate civil rights. The list is quite extensive. Tom looked up sharply. Dad, please. If we go to prison, we'll lose everything. Our jobs, our homes, our futures. Your futures? I almost laughed. Tom, you were planning to destroy my future to save your own. Why should your future matter more than mine? Truth hung heavy in the dining room air, mixing with the scent of turkey and betrayal. But, I continued, watching their faces carefully, I've spent the last week considering alternatives to criminal prosecution, because despite everything you've done, you're still my family. And family means something to me, even if it apparently means nothing to you. Hope flickered in their eyes, the desperate hope of people who just realize the true consequences of their actions. I have a different proposal, a way to save yourselves from federal prison and give you something you've never had to learn, the value of honest work and personal responsibility. I walked to my briefcase, which I'd positioned by the door before dinner, and pulled out a thick folder of documents. These are employment contracts. Real jobs with real companies paying real wages for honest work. I set the folder on the table. Michael, there's a position managing construction supply inventory at Morrison Materials. Starting salary, $45,000 a year. No company car, no expense account, no executive perks. Just honest work for honest pay. Michael's face went pale. He was accustomed to a lifestyle that required six-figure income. $45,000 was poverty by his standards. Lisa, Westerville Elementary needs a substitute teacher, $180 a day when they call. You may be 3 days a week if you're lucky. Annual income somewhere around $25,000 if you work hard and build a good reputation. Lisa stared at the contract like it was a death sentence. She'd been making $80,000 a year in real estate before the market collapsed. Tom, there's an apprentice mechanic position at Miller's Auto Repair. $16 an hour to start, with the possibility of advancement if you prove yourself reliable. That works out to about $33,000 a year before taxes. Tom had never worked with his hands a day in his life. The idea of physical labor, of earning an hourly wage, was completely foreign to his worldview. Here are the terms, I continued, my voice businesslike and final. You each take these jobs immediately. You work them honestly for 5 full years. No side businesses, no investments, no get-rich-quick schemes, just steady, humble employment. I pulled out bank statements showing each of their debt situations. During those 5 years, I will pay all your debts directly to your creditors. Michael, your $275,000 in credit cards and loans will be settled. Lisa, your $325,000 in medical bills and mortgage arrears will be resolved. Tom, your $270,000 in trading losses and loan shark debts will be paid in full. The room was so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. You'll live on your wages, and only your wages. No financial assistance from me beyond debt repayment. You'll learn to budget, to save, to live within your means like millions of working Americans do every day. Margaret found her voice. What about us? What about our marriage? I looked at my wife of 42 years, the woman who'd helped plan my destruction, and felt something final settle in my chest. There is no us anymore, Margaret. Our marriage ended the moment you started coordinating with strangers to have me declared mentally incompetent. I pulled out divorce papers from the folder. These were filed this morning. No-fault divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. You'll receive the minimum required under Ohio law, enough to live modestly, but not enough to fund any more. Conspiracies against family members. Her face crumbled. Brian, please, it doesn't have to end this way. Doesn't it? Margaret, you were planning to have me involuntarily committed next week. You were coordinating the liquidation of my life's work with people I'd never met. What part of our marriage was supposed to survive that level of betrayal? I turned back. To my children, you have a choice. Accept these employment contracts, work honestly for 5 years while I pay your debts, and learn what it means to earn your way in the world. Or refuse my offer and face federal charges that will send you to prison for up to 20 years. Michael was the first to speak. Dad, we can't live on these salaries. Do you know what it costs just to maintain our basic expenses? Then you'll learn to reduce your expenses. Sell the condo you can't afford. Trade the BMW for a used Honda. Shop at discount stores instead of boutiques. Millions of Americans manage to live on these wages. You will too. But our lifestyles, our social standing, your lifestyles were built on debt and my subsidies. Your social standing was purchased with money you didn't earn. Now you'll discover who you actually are when you can't buy your identity with other people's money. Lisa was crying quietly. Dad, 5 years is so long. Can't we prove ourselves in a shorter time? 5 years is how long it took me to build Carter Construction from a pickup truck into a profitable business. If you can learn humility and responsibility in less time, we'll discuss it then. Tom looked defeated. What happens after 5 years? I pulled out the final document from my folder, the trust paperwork I'd had prepared. If you complete the 5-year term successfully, you'll each receive a modest trust fund that will provide basic financial security for the rest of your lives. Not wealth, not luxury, but security. Enough to ensure you never have to conspire against family members for money again. How much? Michael asked. Enough. The exact amounts will be determined by how well you fulfill your obligations during the 5-year period. Excellent work and personal growth will be rewarded. Complaints, shortcuts, or attempts to circumvent the terms will reduce your final distributions. I looked around the table at my family, people who'd shared my name, my home, my love for decades, but who'd proven themselves strangers when money was involved. The alternative is federal prison. Elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted theft of assets from a vulnerable adult. The prosecutors are very interested in cases like this. The FBI estimates you'd serve 15 to 20 years, and you'd still owe the $870,000 when you were released. The choice was stark. 5 years of honest work with all debts paid, or 20 years in prison followed by bankruptcy. I need answers tonight, I continued. These job offers expire at midnight. If you don't accept them, I proceed with criminal charges tomorrow morning. The silence stretched for several minutes. I could see them calculating, weighing their options, trying to find an escape route that didn't exist. Finally, Michael spoke. We accept, all of us. We'll take the jobs. Speak for yourselves, individually. This isn't a group decision. I accept, Michael said quietly. I accept, Lisa whispered. I accept, Tom barely managed. I looked at Margaret. You're not part of this arrangement. Your choice is simpler. Sign the divorce papers or face criminal charges as a co-conspirator. She was crying openly now. I'll sign them. I gathered up all the documents, placing them back in proper folders. The evidence of their conspiracy, the job contracts, the trust arrangements, the divorce papers. Everything needed to dismantle the family that had tried to destroy me and rebuild something honest from its wreckage. There's one more thing, I said, pulling out my phone again. I'm going to play you a recording, something I prepared earlier today, just in case this moment ever came. I pressed play and my own voice filled the room, clear, strong, completely rational. My name is Brian Carter. Today is November 23rd, 2023. I am 71 years old and of sound mind and body. If you are hearing this recording, it means my family has attempted to have me declared mentally incompetent in order to seize control of my assets. The recorded message continued for several minutes, detailing my mental competence, my awareness of my family's financial situations, and my deliberate performance of confused behavior to expose their conspiracy. This recording, along with psychiatric evaluation confirming my mental competence, makes any attempt to claim I was incompetent at the time of these arrangements legally impossible. I stopped the playback and looked around the table one final time. Thanksgiving dinner is over. You have until midnight to report to your new employers. I suggest you use the time to figure out how you're going to explain your career changes to your friends. I walked toward the front door, then paused. Oh, and one more thing. The house will be sold next month. I've purchased a smaller place across town where I can start over without the memories of what this family used to be. I opened the door and stepped out into the cold November air, leaving behind the wreckage of 42 years of marriage and family life. Behind me, I could hear crying, desperate whispered conversations, the sound of people finally understanding the consequences of their choices, but I didn't look back. The man who'd trusted his family with his life and fortune was gone forever, replaced by someone harder and wiser who understood that sometimes the people we love most are the ones most capable of destroying us. The real question now was whether my children were capable of learning from this devastation, or whether they'd simply spend the next 5 years planning their revenge. I supposed I'd find out. 5 months later, I sat in my new home office, reviewing quarterly reports from the companies employing my children. The modest ranch house in Worthington was a stark contrast to the colonial I'd built on Maple Street, but it felt clean, uncontaminated by memories of betrayal. Through my attorney, I received monthly updates on their progress. The reports painted a picture of 3 adults struggling to adapt to a reality they'd never imagined. Michael had been fired from his first position at Morrison Materials after 2 weeks for showing up late repeatedly and questioning management decisions. His second job, stocking shelves at a hardware store, lasted 3 months before he was terminated for arguing with customers about product recommendations. Currently, he was working the night shift at a packaging plant, honest work that paid $38,000 a year and required him to punch a time clock like every other hourly employee. His supervisor's reports described him as sullen but reliable, which I considered progress. More importantly, his $275,000 in debt had been paid in full. His credit cards were closed, his personal loans satisfied, his condo sold to prevent foreclosure. He was living in a studio apartment, driving a used Toyota, and discovering what life looked like when you couldn't buy your way out of problems. Lisa had adapted better to her circumstances. The substitute teaching position had grown into a full-time aide position, working with special needs children, work that paid modestly but seemed to give her genuine satisfaction. Her reports were consistently positive, punctual, patient with students, well-liked by staff. She'd found purpose in work that mattered, even if it didn't pay well. Her $325,000 in debts had been resolved. The underwater mortgage was settled, the medical bills cleared, her family's financial crisis ended. She was renting a small apartment near the school, taking the bus to work, living simply in ways she'd never imagined. Tom's transformation was the most dramatic. The spoiled youngest son, who'd never worked with his hands, had become the star apprentice at Miller's Auto Repair. His natural mechanical aptitude, freed from the pressure of get-rich-quick schemes, was flourishing in an environment that rewarded skill and reliability. Best apprentice we've had in 15 years, his supervisor had reported. Shows up early, stays late, asks good questions. Kid's got real talent. Tom was earning respect through competence rather than inheritance, building self-worth through accomplishment rather than entitlement. His $270,000 in debts, including the dangerous loan shark arrangements, had been eliminated entirely. The total cost of their financial rehabilitation, $870,000. Exactly what they'd planned to steal from me through fraudulent competency proceedings. But the reports also contained warnings. Michael's supervisors noted his resentment, his barely controlled anger at his circumstances. Lisa seemed genuinely reformed, but occasionally made comments, suggesting she viewed her situation as temporary punishment rather than permanent lifestyle change. Tom appeared the most genuinely changed, but he was also the youngest and had less invested in his previous identity. The real test would come when their 5-year terms were completed and they discovered what I'd actually planned for their futures. Margaret's situation was more complex. Our divorce had been finalized in February, ending 42 years of marriage with the kind of legal efficiency that made a mockery of the vows we'd once exchanged. She'd received the minimum spousal support required by Ohio law, enough to maintain a modest lifestyle in a small apartment, but far from the comfortable retirement she'd expected to enjoy in the house I'd built with my own hands. More troubling were the reports from the private investigator I'd retained to monitor her activities. Margaret had been meeting regularly with a man named David Hutchins, a lawyer who specialized in challenging competency determinations and trust arrangements. She was still fighting, still looking for ways to overturn the consequences of her betrayal. Knock on my door at 7:30 p.m. was not entirely unexpected. I'd been monitoring Margaret's activities closely enough to predict this confrontation. She stood on my front porch, looking older than her 70 years, worn down by months of living on a budget she'd never had to manage before. "Brian, we need to talk." I stepped aside to let her enter. The living room of my new house was furnished simply. Comfortable chairs, basic coffee table, no luxury items or expensive decorations. The kind of home a working man might have, not the showplace we'd maintained during our marriage. "You look well," I said, settling into my recliner. "Do I? I've been living in a one-bedroom apartment, taking the bus to grocery shop, clipping coupons to afford basic necessities. Is that what well looks like to you? It's what millions of Americans consider normal, Margaret. Maybe it's time you experienced how most people live." She sat down across from me, her designer handbag now replaced by a simple purse that looked like it came from a discount store. "Brian, this has gone on long enough. You've made your point. The children have learned their lesson. They're all working, all staying out of trouble, all living within their means." "Are they?" "Because my reports suggest Michael is still resentful, still viewing his situation as temporary punishment rather than permanent lifestyle adjustment. He's working hard, doing what you demanded. They all are. They're fulfilling the minimum requirements of our agreement. That's not the same as genuine reform." Margaret leaned forward, her voice taking on the pleading tone she'd once used when she wanted expensive jewelry or luxury vacations. "Brian, please, end this. Give them their trust funds now and let them rebuild their lives properly. They've suffered enough." "Suffered enough?" I almost laughed. "Margaret, they attempted to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could steal everything I'd worked 40 years to build. 5 months of honest work hardly seems like proportionate consequences for attempted grand theft." "It wasn't theft. We were trying to protect you. Were you? Margaret, I have recordings of you coordinating with Guardian Services about liquidating my business assets. I have text messages about scheduling involuntary psychiatric commitments. What part of that was protection?" She looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "The children aren't the only ones who need to understand consequences," I continued. "You were the architect of their conspiracy. You convinced them their desperate situation justified destroying their father. You recruited professional strangers to steal my life's work. I was trying to save my family. You were trying to save their financial situation at the expense of my freedom, my dignity, and my life's work. There's a difference." Margaret stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the modest neighborhood where I'd chosen to rebuild my life. "What do you want from us, Brian? What will it take for you to end this punishment and let us be a family again?" The question hung in the air between us. What did I want? Justice, revenge, genuine reform? I want to know that if I were actually to develop dementia or become genuinely incapacitated, my family wouldn't see it as an opportunity to steal from me. I want to know that my children understand the difference between inheritance and theft. I joined her at the window. "Most of all, Margaret, I want to know that the people who claim to love me wouldn't destroy me if it became financially convenient. We do love you, do you? Because people who love someone don't try to have them declared mentally incompetent for financial gain. They don't coordinate with strangers to liquidate their assets. They don't plan involuntary psychiatric commitments based on manufactured evidence. She was crying now, but whether from remorse or frustration, I couldn't tell. What would it take for you to believe we've changed? I considered the question carefully. What evidence would convince me that their reform was genuine rather than simply strategic? Complete the 5-year terms without complaint or attempts to circumvent the conditions. Prove you can live honest lives on honest wages without plotting ways to access money you didn't earn. And then I walked to my desk and pulled out a folder I'd been updating monthly since Thanksgiving. Then you'll discover what I've actually been planning for your futures. I handed her a document that made her eyes widen with surprise. This is a will leaving everything to charity. That's the will currently in effect, yes. If any of you violate the terms of our agreement, or if anything happens to me before the 5 years are complete, every asset I own will go to organizations that help elderly people protect themselves from family financial abuse. Her face went white. You're not leaving us anything? I'm leaving you the opportunity to prove you deserve something. The children's trust funds exist, Margaret, but they're contingency trusts. If they successfully complete their 5-year terms, they'll receive modest but secure lifetime income. If they don't, the money goes to charity. How modest? Enough to ensure they never have to work again if they choose not to. Not enough to fund luxury lifestyles, but sufficient for comfortable middle-class living. She stared at the document, understanding finally dawning on her face. You've been testing us. This whole time, you've been testing whether we can change. I've been giving you the opportunity to prove your love is stronger than your greed. So far, the results are mixed. Margaret looked around my modest living room, taking in the simple furniture, the absence of luxury items, the lifestyle I'd chosen after ending our marriage. What about us, Brian? Is there any possibility for us? I looked at the woman I'd loved. For 42 years, who'd shared my bed, raised my children, and helped plan my destruction when it became financially advantageous. I don't know, Margaret. Trust, once broken, is incredibly difficult to repair. And you didn't just break it, you shattered it completely. But is it possible? Complete the 5 years without any attempts to circumvent the conditions or challenge the arrangements. Prove to me that you understand why what you did was unforgivable. Show me that you've genuinely changed, not just adapted to temporarily reduced circumstances. She nodded slowly. And then? Then we'll see if there's anything left to rebuild. After she left, I sat in my living room thinking about second chances, genuine reform, and the difference between punishment and justice. My family was learning hard lessons about consequences, personal responsibility, and the value of honest work. But were they learning them from genuine remorse, or simply adapting to circumstances they couldn't change? Time would tell. 4.5 more years would provide plenty of opportunities to test whether their transformation was real or simply strategic patience. But I wasn't optimistic. In my experience, people rarely change their fundamental character, no matter how severe the consequences of their actions. Still, I'd given them a chance to prove me wrong. Whether they took it or wasted it would determine not just their financial future, but whether any remnant of our family could survive the wreckage of their betrayal. The final test was yet to come. 4 years and 11 months after that devastating Thanksgiving dinner, I sat in my attorney's office reviewing the final reports on my family's progress. In 1 month, their terms would be complete, and they'd discover what I'd actually planned for their futures. The transformation had been remarkable, though not in ways I'd entirely expected. Michael had emerged from his anger after 2 years of night shift work and grudging acceptance of his circumstances. His current supervisor described him as one of our most reliable employees and noted that he'd been promoted to shift leader, a position that came with genuine responsibility and the respect of his co-workers. More importantly, Michael had started volunteering at a financial literacy non-profit, teaching debt management classes to people facing bankruptcy. The man who'd once owed $275,000 was now helping others avoid the financial disasters he'd created through his own poor decisions. Lisa had thrived in her work with special needs children. What had begun as a stopgap job had become a genuine calling. She'd completed additional certifications, earned her master's degree in special education through night classes, and was now leading innovative programs that were being studied by other school districts. Her supervisor's report was glowing. Lisa has become an indispensable member of our team. Her work with autistic children is exceptional, and her dedication to professional development is inspiring to everyone around her. Tom had surprised everyone, including himself. The mechanical aptitude he'd inherited from my side of the family had flourished under proper guidance. He'd completed his apprenticeship, earned his master mechanic certification, and been offered a partnership stake in Miller's Auto Repair. Tom Carter is the finest young mechanic I've worked with in 35 years, his supervisor had written. He's got integrity, skill, and genuine care for his customers. He'll own his own shop someday, and it'll be successful because he understands the value of honest work. But the most unexpected transformation had been Margaret's. My ex-wife had spent the first 2 years of our divorce angry and resentful, meeting regularly with attorneys who promised they could challenge my arrangements. She'd exhausted her modest savings on legal fees, convinced that if she could just find the right argument, the right precedent, she could force me to restore her to her previous financial comfort. The turning point had come when she'd run out of money for lawyers and been forced to take a job for the first time in 40 years. The department store position had been humbling, minimum wage, dealing with difficult customers, standing on her feet for 8-hour shifts. But something had shifted in Margaret during those months of genuine struggle. The entitled woman who'd coordinated my destruction had gradually been replaced by someone who understood what it meant to earn her way in the world. Her current employer, a small non-profit that provided services to elderly people, described her as compassionate, reliable, and surprisingly effective at connecting with clients who've been isolated from their families. The irony wasn't lost on me. Margaret was now helping elderly people protect themselves from the kind of family financial abuse she'd once orchestrated against me. But the real test had come 6 months ago, when Margaret discovered she could challenge our divorce settlement. Through a legal loophole her last attorney had identified, Ohio law contained provisions that might have allowed her to claim a larger portion of my assets, particularly if she could demonstrate that my competency arrangements had been made under duress. She'd had a real chance to overturn everything, to reclaim the comfortable lifestyle she'd lost, to force me back into the financial arrangements that had existed during our marriage. Instead, she'd called me. "Brian, I need to tell you something," she'd said during that awkward phone conversation. "My attorney found a way to challenge the divorce settlement. He thinks we could win, maybe get everything back to how it was before." And I told him no. The admission had stunned me. This was Margaret, who'd spent 4 years resenting her reduced circumstances, who'd made no secret of her belief that I'd been unfairly punitive in my arrangements. "I told him I didn't want to challenge what you'd done," she'd continued. "I wanted to finish what I'd started, to prove to you and to myself that I could change." That conversation had led to others, tentative meetings for coffee, careful conversations about what had happened to our family, gradual exploration of whether anything could be salvaged from 42 years of marriage. Margaret was different now. The woman who'd once taken luxury for granted had learned to find satisfaction in simple pleasures. The person who'd viewed my success as her entitlement had discovered the dignity that came from earning her own way. I understand now. She'd told me during our last conversation what you were trying to teach us, not just about money, but about what we owe each other as family members. Now, sitting in my attorney's office, I had to make the final decision about their futures. The trust documents were prepared. Each of my children would receive enough money to ensure comfortable middle-class lives, not luxury, but security. Income that would allow them to pursue meaningful work without financial desperation, to raise their families without the fear that had driven them to betray me. Margaret would receive nothing additional from me, but she'd also be free from any ongoing obligations. Our divorce would remain final, but the door would be open for whatever relationship we could build based on who we'd become rather than who we'd been. There was one more element to my plan that none of them knew about. "Robert," I said to my attorney, "add one more provision to the trust documents." "What kind of provision, Mr. Carter?" I pulled out a folder containing business incorporation papers, architectural plans, and financial projections for a project I'd been developing in secret for 5 years. I'm establishing the Sarah Carter Foundation for Elder Protection, named after my late wife. It will provide legal assistance, financial counseling, and support services to elderly people who've been victimized by family financial abuse. I spread the documents across his desk. The foundation will be funded with half of my remaining assets, approximately $800,000. The other half will fund my children's trust accounts. Robert reviewed the papers with professional interest. "This is quite comprehensive, Brian. Legal aid services, financial planning assistance, even temporary housing for elderly people who've been displaced by family financial abuse." Sarah would have supported this cause. She always worried about people who trusted family members who didn't deserve that trust. And the operational structure? The foundation will be managed by a board of directors including myself, Dr. Patricia Williams, who confirmed my mental competence during the family's conspiracy, and Margaret Carter, if she chooses to accept the position. Robert's eyebrows rose. "Your ex-wife? Are you certain about that decision?" "Margaret understands elder financial abuse better than anyone. She's seen it from both sides, as someone who perpetrated it and as someone who now works to prevent it. That perspective could be valuable." I signed the final documents, officially establishing trust funds that would provide my children with lifetime security while creating an organization that would help other elderly people protect themselves from the betrayal I'd experienced. "There's one more thing," I told Robert. "I want to invite all of them to dinner next week at my house. I think it's time they learned what their 5 years of honest work have actually earned them." The dinner was set for the following Sunday. I spent the week preparing, cooking the kind of simple meal I'd learned to make in my modest kitchen. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, the comfort food of my childhood, back when families were expected to earn what they received. They arrived together, which surprised me. Michael, Lisa, and Tom had apparently been talking, coordinating, perhaps even supporting each other through their years of reduced circumstances. Margaret came separately, wearing the kind of simple dress she'd learned to buy at discount stores, but looking more genuinely beautiful than she had in years of expensive clothes and professional makeup. "Dad," Michael said as they settled around my small dining table, "we need to tell you something before we eat." I waited. "We've been talking, the three of us, about what happens when our terms are complete next month." Lisa picked up the thought. "We know you've prepared trust funds for us, but we want you to know that we don't expect them anymore." "Don't expect them?" Tom nodded. "Dad, we've all learned to live on what we earn. We've discovered that work has dignity when you do it honestly, that money has value when you have to earn it yourself. We're not the same people who tried to steal from you 5 years ago," Michael continued. "We've become people who understand the difference between inheriting something and earning it. Margaret spoke quietly from across the table. What they're saying, Brian, is that we've learned what you were trying to teach us, that love isn't about what you can take from each other. It's about what you're willing to give, even to people who've hurt you. I looked around the table at faces that had changed over 5 years of genuine struggle and growth. The entitled, desperate people who'd planned my destruction had been replaced by individuals who'd discovered their own worth through honest effort. In that case, I said, pulling out the trust documents, you'll be happy to know what I've actually planned. I explained the trust arrangements, the lifetime security they'd earned through 5 years of proved reform, the foundation that would turn their betrayal into protection for other elderly people facing family financial abuse. But most importantly, I concluded, you've earned something that money can't buy and trust documents can't guarantee. You've earned the right to be my family again. The tears started with Lisa, spread to Tom, and eventually reached even Michael. Margaret cried quietly, her face showing a mixture of relief, gratitude, and genuine remorse for the pain she'd caused. There's one more thing, I said, reaching across the table to take Margaret's hand. The foundation needs a director, someone who understands elder financial abuse from every perspective, who's genuinely committed to preventing other families from experiencing what we went through. Brian, are you asking me to? I'm asking you to turn our family's worst moment into something that helps other people, to make sure that what happened to us never happens to other elderly people who trust their families. She squeezed my hand, and for the first time in 5 years, I felt a genuine connection to the woman I'd married so many decades ago. Yes, she whispered. I'd be honored. As we sat around that simple table, sharing a modest meal and planning a foundation that would protect other elderly people from family betrayal, I realized that justice had taken an unexpected form. My children hadn't just learned the value of honest work. They'd discovered their own dignity, their own worth, their own capacity for genuine accomplishment. Margaret hadn't just been punished for her betrayal. She'd been transformed into someone who could prevent others from suffering the same violation of trust, and I hadn't just protected myself from their conspiracy. I'd created something positive from the wreckage of our family, something that would help other people avoid the pain of discovering that the people they loved most were the ones most capable of destroying them. The Sarah Carter Foundation for Elder Protection would be my true legacy, not the construction business I'd built, not the money I'd accumulated, but the protection I could provide to other elderly people facing the betrayal I'd experienced. Because sometimes the most devastating betrayals can become the foundation for the most meaningful victories. Sometimes love really can conquer greed, but only after greed has been defeated completely, and sometimes the best revenge is not revenge at all, but the kind of forgiveness that makes people ashamed of ever needing to be forgiven. As I looked around the table at my family, genuinely my family again, for the first time in 5 years, I raised my glass in a toast. To second chances, I said. To genuine transformation, and to the understanding that love isn't about what we can take from each other, but what we're willing to give, even to people who've hurt us. We drank to new beginnings, to hard-earned wisdom, and to the possibility that even the most broken families can be rebuilt on foundations of genuine respect and earned trust. And you know what? For the first time in 5 years, it actually felt like Thanksgiving. Now I want to hear from you. If you were in my position, would you have shown the same mercy to family members who betrayed you so completely? Could you have forgiven people who tried to steal your life's work and have you declared mentally incompetent? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and click on the bell icon to receive notifications. Stories as incredible as the one you just heard are our focus here. Click on the video that just appeared on your screen to hear another incredible story of family betrayal and unexpected redemption. Trust me, you won't want to miss it.